Basel II and its tendency towards pro-cyclicality in hindrance in your business model? Do you think that the thinking there should evolve?
See, I would put it this way, that in a regulatory context, the need for moving to Basel II in India was a given. So we had to adhere to that. Having said that, I would think that in retrospect, when I look at things, that move and the move to have extra capital probably saved a whole lot of us. So
Okay.
I think by any stretch of imagination, you can't say that that was not a right move.
Right.
That was a right
But
move.
that Basel I could have just quite easily, dealt with that.
But I think what Basel II did was bring in a risk culture, which probably wasn't there in most institutions, and got you thinking on risk culture. So without necessarily going into Basel II per se, I would think that the risk culture that came in useful. Going forward, I think you raised a very important issue. I think there is, as far as emerging market banks are concerned, there are a whole lot of, I would say, to us, there's a whole lot of confusion out there, and we do not know where this confusion will lead to. In our own, I would say, domain, we are well regulated and everything is very clear. But if I look at a global context, for example, I flagged some of the issues earlier. What ought to be leverage, and what will our competitors do in the context of leverage, and what would that mean to their ability to do business? Maybe do business with us, and that could have an impact on a whole range of banks from emerging markets.
Why is that question so important to you? I find
No,
that very
the question is important to me as an emerging market player, not as ICICI Bank. To me, as ICICI Bank, probably it is of very little significance. But if I am on an emerging market council, and emerging market banks would rely on banks from other countries to lend to them, and not so much capital access,
Right.
because these banks or these countries are not mature enough to get to markets, and that capital flow is not going to happen.
And when
Then the development of these countries is going to be impaired. I'm looking at it from that context.
Is there a thinking in terms of what is best practice? Is there an idea of what is an acceptable level of leverage? Is eight times book? Is that too little? Too
No, I
conservative?
think that is really adding to the confusion. There is no assessment of what is best practice.
Okay.
Neither on leverage, neither on. I think at the G20, frankly, they didn't even want to use the word leverage. So they use an euphemism for leverage. It's very interesting as to, but you then need to define, even if you have a euphemistic term, you then need to define, what is it that is right. The other thing that is going to cause confusion, and it will cause confusion to, not necessarily to all emerging market banks, but banks which have taken that one step to get to be global, are this non-alignment of accounting standards. You have the International Accounting Standards Board at one end, and you got FSB at the other end, and you got local regulation at the third end. So, where do you really find common ground here?
Do you see, and especially as an emerging market bank that is very sensitive to the receptivity of other jurisdictions to your business growing, do you suspect that there might be a pulling back in different jurisdictions in allowing, or subscribing to a common platform?
Clearly, on a in a larger context, there will be reassessments, and I hope that the reassessments don't go the way of the WTO situation, because again, I come back to this use of phrase leverage. If that is the wide range of leverage that is there between banks in different countries, there are going to be questions that I would say emerging countries will raise, or European countries will raise, banks from some other countries. So I think these are the sort of issues that will come up as we go along. So I think that we will need to, this issue won't be resolved very soon, of harmonization and all banks being on the same platform. So whether it's pulling back, pulling forward, pulling apart, I think we are just seeing the start of this.
Of what you know of the Indian representation in the Financial Stability Board, what do you think would be important to India?
I would think that if I were to advocate anything to the Indian government, I would say that we need a level playing field. And I think we are getting to be grown-up boys, and I think we need to make sure that that level playing field is there. In several areas, I think in the past, the playing field has not been level. And I think this is the right time to raise our voice and say we need to make sure that that is a given condition.
But foreign banks would say the same about India in terms of access to branch networks and that the field needs to be leveled in the emerging markets themselves.
Emmanuel, I will be charitable in this context. We are now in 18 countries. I can tell you, except for 1 or 2 countries, we are more open than others. So I won't go into country by country, but I can tell you, except for 1 or 2 countries where we got access immediately.
That India is more open as a country.
India is more open as a country, and it's only that we have not presented ourselves or represented ourselves properly. And if you then take the entire financial services spectrum, India is more open than I would say 98% of the countries.
Because now, what you're saying is very important because you are the most aggressive Indian bank going global.
So let me just take in India, except banking and insurance, every other area is 100% open to any foreign player without any restriction. And again, in banking, there are no restrictions in coming up and setting up your branch or a subsidiary. There are clearly laid out guidelines on how you can then actually start branching. And the government says very clearly that what we are doing is completely in line with WTO requirements. That's all. So nobody can say that there is no market access. Access is exactly in line with WTO requirements. And what we are saying is that we are finding countries in the developed world which are not playing the same game, which are not playing by the same rule book.